Thanks for joining me for another episode of Trip Report. On this episode, we're going to talk all about LSD. To be honest with you, I didn't have much interest in LSD. It was the one that I think had the most stigma around it, where you heard, oh, so and so tried acid and he's never been the same and he went off the rails and he's schizophrenic now. And I'd heard a lot of horror stories about it. And then the other things that kind of steered me away were the fact that it is a lab synthesized chemical. So I was always worried about getting a clean product and making sure it wasn't tainted with something, or just not knowing if it was good stuff. And then the duration always kind of bugged me out too, because with psilocybin, you can be in and out in 4 to 5 hours, whereas LSD, I had always heard it could be 8 to 12. And I was like, I don't know that I really want to be in that space for that long, especially having had a few more difficult experiences with psilocybin. I thought to myself, if I think I'm dying for 4 hours straight, that's hard enough. I can't imagine thinking I'm dying for 8 to 12 hours. So those were kind of the reasons that I was on the fence about it. But I did have a lot of interest with how it compared to psilocybin in terms of the visual state and the messages that came through and all that sort of thing too, because I had a few friends who said that LSD was their preferred psychedelic because although it gave you all the cool visuals and enhanced sound quality of music and all of that, that it didn't really come with the mind fuckery that psilocybin sometimes can bring on. So it was one of those things where I kind of kept an ear out for it, but I was never actively seeking it. And then in 2018, I was talking with a friend of mine, older gentleman, who grew up on Haight-Ashbury, the psychedelic capital of San Francisco in the 60s and 70s. And so he had experience with, every drug that became illegal back then. And he said that he had a connection that was still in that area and that he could get good quality LSD from. So I said, well, if you're able to get your hands on some, I'll take some, just let me know. And so a couple of weeks went by and he said that he did get his hands on some, that I could come over and grab it. So I went and got it, and he was calling it window pane, but it was essentially clear-ish, yellowish gel tabs. So I got some, and then my buddy had a LSD test kit, where it's, a reagent kit where you put a drop of some chemical on it and it's supposed to turn purple, and, cut a little chunk off of one piece, put the chemical on it, it turned purple. So I felt pretty confident in what I got because he claimed it was from a great source that he trusted. So I was, ready to go. The day I decided to do it, which was April 7th of 2018, I had two friends interested in joining. One couldn't come over until later, but he had his own source of LSD that he was just going to take and then head over. And then my other friend, we'll just give him fake names for the time being. So a friend who was coming over already we'll go with Brad, and then the other guy we'll call Gary. So Brad was coming over. He also hadn't had LSD experience, but he had to be somewhere later in the day. So he said, you know what, I'll just do some psilocybin and hang out, and you can do the LSD. So at least we can both, be on an experience, but I don't have 8 to 12 hours to be in this. And I said, fine, you do you. Ingestion was at 11:30. So I threw one tab on my tongue, and it had a bit of a bitter flavor. And then my tongue went numb where the tab had touched it, which seemed a little odd because I had always heard that, LSD was colorless, flavorless. So I didn't know if it had something to do with the gel tab that it was on, but I just moved along and was hoping for it to kick in. It was about 12:45 that I had written the next entry in my journal and said nothing was happening. And mind you, Brad, who had taken psilocybin, was already deep in his journey. And I'm just sitting around, hanging out by the pool, enjoying the day, but waiting for effects to come on and having nothing happen. So I decide, okay, well, it's been long enough that this stuff might just be really weak. I guess I'll take another tab. So I popped a second tab, and that was right at the time that Gary showed up. He was already in it, so Gary and Brad are both having their own sweet time hanging by the pool in that space, and I'm just still sitting there waiting for it to come on. So I have in the journal at 2:45 that it finally had hit, or at least by the time I had written this in the journal, it was going. So pretty delayed onset, especially for 2 tabs of LSD. I had written in the journal, I wrote, refreshed yet cold, invigorated, but definitely tripping. At that point, the closed eye visuals were very bizarre. It was the same patterns and everything that I had seen on psilocybin, but it was interrupted. It almost looked like somebody was flashing a strobe light when my eyes were closed, and that strobe interruption was breaking up a fluid visual that I would normally see. So that was kind of bizarre, and I took note of that. And then the colors, both open and closed eye visuals, weren't nearly as vibrant as what they were on psilocybin. So that was kind of bizarre. The next journal entry was at 4:30. It was Brad had completed his psilocybin experience, had to go take care of whatever errand he had to take care of. So he went on his way, and it was still just Gary and I there. The entry that I had journaled at 4:30 was comfort kills, human beings thrive on stress, and stress heals. This is kind of an interesting thing to come through because you think about the modern society we live in where people are mostly sedentary. They wake up in the morning, they sit down in their car on the drive to work where they sit for 8 hours a day. Then they drive home sitting in their car and they watch television sitting on the couch. And the very little bit of movement they get, that takes its toll on the body because we are creatures that were meant to hunt and gather and be moving all day long. So that's one aspect of it, of comfort killing. And then with the stress healing side of things, it's, if you look at people who do saunas and ice bath and high intensity exercise, fasting, all of these different things that put stress on the body have been shown to be really beneficial for longevity and overall health and well-being. So interesting little message to come through there. Probably another 30 minutes to an hour went by, and I could tell that Gary was getting a little restless, and he had asked me, he just was over sitting next to the pool, and he said, "Have you ever ridden bikes on acid?" And I was like, "I've never done acid, so no, I haven't." And he was like, "Oh, dude, you're going to love it." So I grabbed headphones, we both cranked up some music, hopped on the bikes, and just rode off into the neighborhood. And it was a good time. It was, feeling the wind blow by you and feeling that acceleration change being on a bicycle. It was fascinating. It was definitely a good time. And we ended up over at a new brewery that had just opened and had a couple beers. And this was the first time in 4 years that when that buzz kicked in from the alcohol, I actually enjoyed it. So that was pretty interesting because I'd said previously, I hated that buzzed feeling from alcohol that made me feel like I was stupid. And I guess my brain was so tuned up, with all of the different centers firing, that I still felt like I was in control and had that sense of intelligence while the effects of the alcohol kicked back in. So if anything, it just kind of loosened up, and we were having some good conversation, catching up. We were talking with the owner of the brewery, chatting him up. He was super fun to talk to. There was monster trucks on the TV, and it was like being a kid again, watching Gravedigger and monster trucks. It was just mind blowing to think that people build these trucks to jump them over these things. Just crazy, but overall a good time. And we were probably there for 30 minutes to an hour, something like that. And then some guy came in, and we saw him walk across the bar like he was going to the restroom. And he stopped by us, and he looked, and he was like, "You guys are living free." And we were like, "Cool. Yeah, man. All right." And then he goes, "A little too free." And he gestured at us and then walked off to the bathroom. And I was like, what is that supposed to mean? So I'm thinking about it. So I looked at Gary, and I see that his pupils are just unbelievably dilated. Could almost see no color in them. It was just pure black. And I thought, oh no, are my eyes like that? And I said, "Hey man, are my pupils as dilated as what yours are?" And he was like, "Oh yeah, for sure." He was like, "I don't even see any blue there." And I was like, oh no. And the anxiety kicked in, and I was like, everybody in this whole bar knows we're tripping. We shouldn't be here. What if somebody calls the cops? Mind you, cops can't do anything to you if you're acting normal, just being under the influence of something. Yeah, if you have it on you, they could get you for, anything they want to slap on you, possession, intent to distribute, any of that BS. But if you're just under the influence, but not acting like an idiot, you're usually pretty safe. So either way, it was just the anxiety in my head, and I was like, we got to get out of here. We got to get out of here. So we closed out our tab, hopped on bikes, and started pedaling back. I think it was starting to wear down a little bit, so we had parted ways. His house was on the way back to mine, so he peeled off and went about his day, and then I cruised back here. So from there, it just kind of tapered down once I got back to the house. And what I have written at the very end of the journal is the takeaways that I had from it were, A, it was too long. It was just, It just seemed like it was going on and on and on forever. Visuals weren't as good. So like I said, they weren't as vibrant. They seemed intermittent with eyes closed, and just, nowhere near the level of what psilocybin had to offer at, even a pretty low dose. It didn't seem like any lessons came through to me. I mentioned the comfort kills thing, but that wasn't anything mind blowing for me. So I just kind of felt like there weren't as many messages coming through that usually do on psilocybin. There was one thing that I journaled that it kind of came on in waves. So I would have waves of tired and then waves of energy, and it was kind of going back and forth. And the tired waves were kind of a bummer. So I put that down as something that I was not a fan of. Music wasn't as good. It didn't sound as cool as psilocybin made it sound. And then I ended it out saying one and done. Like, if this is what LSD is, I don't have any interest in it. So some time passes, and I was listening to a podcast with Duncan Trussell, the comedian, and he had mentioned something about fake acid. And he was like, yeah, it's super cheap. It's all over the place right now, very easy to get. And, it's a fraction of the cost of what LSD is, whatever. And so I was like, I wonder what that is. Googled fake acid, and what came up was NBOME, which I think it's 25I-NBOME, and they refer to it as N-bomb. So I started looking, what's the difference between LSD and N-bomb? And the first thing that came up was N-bomb has a bitter/metallic taste. There you go with the bitter taste that I had from my first experience. Second, your tongue goes numb with N-bomb, which is exactly what I had. The third was the come up is from 30 to 120 minutes. So my 2-hour come up was exactly what I dealt with. Now, the biggest problem with this is that LSD is pretty safe at all doses. I don't know that they've ever even identified a lethal dose of LSD in a human being. But with N-bomb, it doesn't take that much for it to induce seizures, or some accounts said that people died on it. I couldn't find any true cases of it, so I don't know if this is propaganda or if it's legit. But the problem with 120-minute come-on time is, like I said, I didn't feel it at an hour and a half, so I took a second tab, and then it finally kicked in. But if you have somebody that's taken a tab, doesn't feel anything at 30 minutes, thinking it's LSD, takes another tab, waits 30 minutes, thinking it's LSD still, and takes another tab or another 2 tabs on top of that, now you're approaching that danger zone of taking too much, to the point where this stuff can be toxic enough to induce a seizure or possibly even death. So very dangerous. The other kind of scary thing about N-bomb is that if you use the reagent kit like I did to test it, all that those kits test for is serotonergic compounds, which N-bomb is. So it turned purple, but it was not LSD. So that's kind of the scary thing about this, and why I'm not a fan of street chemical drugs, because unless you have like a mass spectrometer or something like that that can truly tell you what it is, these reagent kits aren't reliable to tell you that you have what you think you have, let alone the dose that's on your little gel tab or your piece of paper. So it can get away from you whenever it comes to the chemical drugs that are out there. So that's why I'm still kind of on the fence about them. But either way, I'm pretty confident that what I had was N-bomb and not LSD. So whenever I said one and done, I mean, definitely one and done with N-bomb. What I had left, I threw away. I think I had like 3 or 4 tabs left, and I was like, I'm not messing with this. I don't trust this stuff. It wasn't a good experience, and got rid of it. And I let the guy who I got it from know, hey man, this is not LSD. I would recommend just throwing it away too. Like it's not worth messing around with it, in my opinion. So some time went by, and I was talking with a friend that was on the East Coast, and explained to him, I thought I had a good source, and it wasn't. He was like, oh, if you ever need LSD, I have a very, very reliable source for it, and I can get it whenever. So I said, cool, let's just do it. I mean, get me some, and maybe I'll give this another go. So this is about a year later, because the last journal entry was April 7th, 2018, and my next journal entry is 8/18/2019. So I had gotten the second batch of what was allegedly true LSD, tested this, went purple again, but again, that doesn't make me all that confident in it. So this is at 12:30. I took a tab, and no flavor, no tongue numb. So that was a good starting point. And then 12:33, so only 3 minutes in, I started yawning. So I was like, okay, this might be a pretty quick onset then. And then at 12:45, I had documented that visuals begin. So it definitely was kicking in the time frame of true LSD. And then, yeah, no flavor and no tongue numbness. So I was just hanging out next to the pool, and what I had documented in the journal was that the visuals weren't too crazy. So closed eye visuals were very similar to psilocybin, just not as bright or vivid. And then open eyes, it was still very psychedelic in the terms of HD vision and kind of cartoony, but it still didn't seem to be as visually crazy as psilocybin was. So I came inside because I guess being out by the pool, I'd had sunscreen on and it was getting in my eyes and burning. And I was like, gotten into the headspace of, oh, well, I have sprayed these chemicals on me. I need to get these chemicals off me. So I came in, got in the shower, and then I came back out to hang out on the couch for a little bit and cool back down because it was pretty hot outside. And what I had written in the journal was the popcorn ceiling is amazing. So I guess that the visuals had hit it hard enough that now laying in the couch, I could watch the popcorn ceiling become the crazy movie scape that it typically becomes with psilocybin. So I guess I watched that for a little bit. I wrote music is amazing. So it did come back up to what I was usually expecting from a psilocybin experience in terms of how crazy the open eye visuals were and how great music sounded. The next thing that I written in the journal was I noticed how cozy the house felt. And so my girlfriend had recently moved in with me and she repainted most of the house. It was just like a much better color layout than what was in here before. It used to be like just all the walls were beige, and then I had those two walls that were painted like a chalkboard, so it was weird to have two black walls in an all beige house. So with the new paint, it looked and felt so much more cozy. So I was like grateful for her. And then it kind of opened up that can of worms of how just like happy I was to have her in my life, to have somebody that was so loving of me, like my own personal cheerleader. And it was just so good to have her around because she was the type of person that was always showering me with compliments and, making me feel good about myself. And I think truly having more love for me than I even had for myself. And that was a good eye opener for me. And I think like a lesson that I needed to learn that kind of unpacked over the next several experiences. After thinking about how wonderful she was and what an asset she was to my life, that kind of sparked up what went down with myself and my ex-wife. And what it opened up with was kind of showing me how terrible of a husband that I was. And it was a weird thing to wrap my head around because my ex-wife was in an unfortunate horse accident where she had gotten kicked in the head, and everything kind of went downhill from there. And I think I had initially blamed it as damage to the prefrontal cortex because when I was looking up research on it, they were saying damage to the prefrontal cortex can change behavior in somebody. And I saw what I thought was behavior change, and ultimately it led with her leaving. And I think that was really what it came down to, is that was my way of justifying her departure. But it kind of opened up more and more of the darker side of things and the reasons why I had pushed her away. And it was a lot of stuff like when all was said and done and we had our last few conversations, one was, you never bought me flowers. And then I stopped and thought about it. I was like, yeah, well, flowers are a waste of money. I mean, they just die. And like, I would rather be putting money aside to retire later or something like that. And it was all these things where at the time I was living in the future and always saving up to try to have like a young retirement. And I was like, we'll travel the world whenever I can have enough money set aside that I can be retired, but not focusing on I could die tomorrow. And then we didn't actually get to go and travel and explore the adventure side of things because I was too focused on the future instead of living in the present. So that was one lesson that I think that I was supposed to learn from her, was to live in the present, not in the past, not in the future. And then it came into me again where when all was said and done, she said to me, you didn't even tell me I looked beautiful on my wedding day. And that really hurt when she told me that, because I was so anxious and in a weird headspace on our wedding day that I drank 2 Four Locos before I got up to the altar. And when she got up there to join me at the altar, the first thing she said was, "You smell like a bar." So then I'm already so anxious to be in front of, which is only friends and family. So there shouldn't have been any reason to be anxious being in front of the people that I know and care about. But that was what I was dealing with the PTSD and everything else, was being in a crowded environment, being the center of attention. It just, like, I needed alcohol to be there. And so when she said, "You smell like a bar," that drove the anxiety even further, because now I'm thinking, oh, this priest thinks that I smell like a bar. We already probably shouldn't be in a church doing this because neither of us believe in this. And now this guy sees me showing up smelling like I've been drinking prior to this. And the anxiety was just running out of control. So in my mind, even though she looked unbelievable, I was too worried about me to say anything to her. And there's no excuse for that. I mean, it's a bummer that she had to deal with that day that's supposed to be one of the most special days of life, and me just being checked out because of worrying about my own problems. So that was a bummer. And basically what it showed me was that although everything started out so good between us, I slowly pushed us apart. And that was a tough thing to wrap my head around. And it was just like, I was so broken in those years without love. The next example came through, was that you need to love yourself before you can love others. And that I did not love myself. So that was I think this is the first time this really came up in these journeys. And then it just kept hitting me harder and harder and harder as I ventured into ayahuasca and higher dose psilocybin and all of that. So that transitioned to, I was worried that with my current girlfriend that I wasn't putting out enough love and that I might be driving her away, and that she was so loving of me, which I did see with my ex-wife in the beginning of our relationship. And I was like, damn, am I going to do the same thing again? Like, am I not going to be able to give her what she needs to stick around? But the lessons were learned were, get her flowers. You know what I mean? Compliment her. Do all the things that you need to do that I was unable to do previously, which are obviously required to keep a strong relationship. So that kind of got in my head and started running the anxiety again, was like, am I doing enough? Is this going to just be another setup for another letdown? And is it going to be a constant vicious cycle because I can't love myself? I can't love somebody else. And so it was a tough lesson to wrap my head around, but I kind of was like, I need to shake this off, get to a new space. So I got up, left the house, went back out to the backyard. And at 3:00, I journaled that I felt elevated, healthy, and strong. So although I went through a little bit of a dark place there, which that's kind of why I think they call these things, like, it's like a hero's journey, is you come in strong and then you can go into a dark place to explore, learn some things, and then you usually come back out on top in a beneficial space. So at least by 3:00, I was, like I said, feeling elevated, healthy, strong. So I was out in the hammock, and a buddy of mine had texted me and said, you really need to check out this album. It's by the artist Abstract, and it's called Superhuman. And he was like, oh, I love it whenever I'm on psychedelic stuff. So I pulled it up on Spotify, and it's actually super interesting. Like, I ended up listening to it just a couple days ago when I was thinking about recording this podcast, to listen to it sober again to see if it hit as hard. And I mean, it's a beautiful album. It's very bizarre in that I guess I would call it like poetic hip hop, but it starts off with the whole thing is like a running story of an AI entity and how we encounter the singularity, and AI takes over on a different planet and they lose an artifact, which is a person. So she comes to Earth to find a new specimen of human to download consciousness and learn who their creators were. So very bizarre, but a very thought-provoking album to listen to at the time. A few months prior, I was skinning palm trees in the backyard. I didn't have much experience with it. I was just skinning what was chopped off of the fronds up to give it that nice smooth look. And I was getting them really close up to the very tip. And as I moved on to the next tree, I heard like a crack and then a crash. And I looked, in the palm tree that I had just skinned, I guess I skinned it too high and it didn't have enough strength around the fronds to maintain it. And the whole top of the tree just cracked off and fell. And I was super bummed out because it was like a probably 14 to 16 foot tall palm tree that had been here when I bought the place. So I was just super bummed to see the tree crash out. And I was hoping that they regrow from scratch, or, that it wasn't game over for it. But after the few months had passed, it still was just a big stump. And it was right in front of the hammock that I was sitting on. So I looked at it, and it really bummed me out just thinking about killing this tree that was here before me. The only thing I was trying to do here was to, I've planted a ton of trees since, trying to cultivate this kind of like backyard oasis or little jungle. And I took out one of the biggest trees that was there, that was here before me. And I actually started tearing up about it. Like I was so bummed out, and, I mentally like apologized to the tree that I was so sorry for killing it. And I mean, legitimately, like tears rolling down my face, so sad for killing this tree. And I don't know how to explain it, but it was as if I got a message from the tree forgiving me. And like, this is all going down while listening to this album, but I got this sense of peace of, every time I looked at that tree previously, I was like pissed that I didn't know how to skin trees properly and that I killed this thing. And it was like in that apology that I got from the tree, I was just put at ease. And that was super bizarre, but awesome at the same time, to be able to let that go and realize, for the loss of one tree, I've planted probably 30 others. So it's part of the cycle of life and nature that everything dies and just makes room for rebirth of new things. So that was pretty interesting. I have written here at 517, I thought that it was tapering off, but it said it made a heavy comeback. So even the true LSD kind of runs in waves. Like it comes in with heavy visuals and then tapers off to where you almost think like you're coming out of it, and then it comes back in heavy again. And so it looked like at that point I put down that I was listening to AWOL Nation again, because I thought it was fascinating after that cannabis / psilocybin combined experience at Mesmerica. So I was listening to that genre of music for a little bit, enjoying it, and then it looks like it casually started tapering off, that was the last peak that I experienced, and then I had written at 7 p.m. that I was back to baseline. So that was a pretty fascinating experience, clearly way better than the N-bomb experience was. So I will absolutely never touch N-bomb again, not worth it. I've only had one or two legit LSD experiences since that one, just because it is a marathon. Like it's such a long time to be in that headspace. And the last one did take a little bit of a hard turn on me. And so I was trying to ground for 4 or 5 hours in a bizarre headspace. So I haven't really had much of a calling to get back into that one. That being said, from a microdose perspective, I think LSD is the best substance out there for it. So I've tried every psilocybin microdose protocol that exists, from Stamets stack with the niacin and lion's mane, varying dosages, and never noticed much of a change. I mean, I would sometimes feel like that I was just generally in a better mood, but with LSD microdosing, and I assume the tabs that I got were about 100 micrograms. So I chopped them up into 6 pieces and then would just take 1/6 of that 100. And it was like the perfect amount, because there was no psychoactive side of it. Like there was no visual experience or anything along those lines. But there were quite a few times that my lady would ask me, "What are you smiling about?" And I would just sit there and be like, "I don't know. I'm just happy." And, it's good to just be happy for no reason. And I think most people are supposed to be happy all the time for no reason. But that is what I get from that microdose of LSD. Now, I don't do it very often, but I do notice that if things are a little bit off for a week and I don't want to dive into a full-blown experience, that microdosing LSD does have the potential to kind of snap you out of a funk. So that is what I think is, at least for me, the best use of LSD is the microdose side of it. So yeah, that's my experience with LSD. Very long duration, interesting molecule, very similar to psilocybin. Perfect, in my opinion, the best molecule for microdosing. But everybody out there has their own thing that works for them. And I know some people that say mescaline's my number one. Other people say mushrooms are my number one. Other people say DMT, that's my thing, or LSD, that's my thing. And I think all of these things open different doors in the brain and unpack different things. So they all have their benefit, but you got to figure out what works for you. And although I like it from a microdosing perspective, I can definitely say LSD is not my number one. Thanks again for joining me. I'm really grateful to everybody that takes the time to listen to these. Take care. I'll see you on the next one. Love you guys.